The sound of 50 Harley-Davidsons rumbling in the parking lot outside the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse was like thunder rolling across the desert. I sat at the bar, nursing my third beer of the night, trying to blend in with the leather jackets and tattoos while my hands shook with nerves I couldn't quite control. For 6 months, I'd been planning this moment, infiltrating one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in Nevada to find answers about my brother's death. My name is Dr. James Sullivan, though everyone in this clubhouse knew me as Jimmy, the freelance writer working on a story about biker culture. At 42 years old, I'd spent the last 15 years of my life in surgical scrubs, saving lives in the trauma unit at Vegas General Hospital. But 2 years ago, everything changed when my 25-year-old brother Danny died in what the police called a single-vehicle accident on Highway 95. The official report said Danny had been drinking, lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a guardrail at 90 miles per hour. But Danny didn't drink. He was training for the police academy, preparing to follow in our father's footsteps. He'd been sober for 3 years after a teenage DUI had scared him straight. The Danny I knew would never have gotten on a bike after having even a single beer, so I'd started digging, following leads that the cops had missed or ignored, asking questions that made people uncomfortable. And every trail I followed led me back to the same place, the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, whose members had been seen arguing with Danny at a gas station the night he died. Tonight was supposed to give me the answers I'd been searching for. I'd spent months building my cover story, learning biker culture, even buying a used Sportster to make my story believable. I'd told them I was writing a book about the real brotherhood among riders, the way they took care of their own. Most of them had bought it, welcomed me into their weekly gatherings, shared their stories over beer and whiskey, but I'd been asking too many questions about the past, about members who'd left the club, about accidents and incidents from 2 years ago. And tonight, I could feel the suspicious glances, the way conversation stopped when I approached, the growing sense that my welcome was wearing thin. The clubhouse itself was exactly what you'd expect. A converted warehouse, decorated with motorcycle memorabilia, Confederate flags, and photos of members stretching back decades. The bar ran along one wall, tended by a woman called Gypsy, who had arms covered in tattoos and eyes that missed nothing. Pool tables dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather couches and wooden tables scarred by years of beer bottles and cigarettes. Most of the members were decent guys, working-class men who'd found brotherhood and identity in their club. They worked construction jobs, ran small businesses, raised families. The motorcycle club gave them something to belong to, a code of honor in a world that often felt chaotic and meaningless. But then there was Razor McKenzie. Vincent Razor McKenzie was the club's vice president, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him into every room he entered. 6'4", with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He'd done time for assault and was suspected in at least 3 unsolved murders. His nickname came from his preferred weapon, a straight razor he carried everywhere and wasn't afraid to use. For weeks, Razor had been watching me with the kind of intensity that made my surgeon's hands shake. Tonight, something in his expression told me that my time was up. "Hey there, writer boy," Razor's voice boomed across the clubhouse as he approached the bar. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately. Makes me wonder what kind of story you're really trying to tell." I took a sip of my beer, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just trying to understand the culture, you know? The bond between riders. The way you guys look out for each other." Razor laughed, but it was a cold sound that made several nearby conversations stop. "The way we look out for each other, huh? You know what I think, Jimmy? I think you're full of shit." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Other club members had turned to watch, sensing drama in the way predators sense blood. This was the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for, when my cover story would be tested by someone who'd survived on the streets, by reading people and detecting lies. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Razor moved closer, his massive frame blocking out the neon beer signs behind the bar. "See, I've been thinking about all these questions you've been asking, about members who left the club, about things that happened before you showed, about specific dates and places that ain't got nothing to do with writing no book about brotherhood." He reached over and picked up my beer bottle, examining it like it contained evidence of my deception. "Makes me think maybe you ain't really interested in our culture at all. Maybe you're here looking for something else entirely." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. This was it, the moment when 6 months of planning either paid off or got me killed in a desert clubhouse, surrounded by men who considered violence a reasonable solution to most problems. "I don't know what you're getting at," I said, but the words came out weak and unconvincing. That's when Razor smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "Leave courage in the comments if you think I should have stood up to Razor immediately, or truth if you think I should have revealed who I really was. Don't forget to subscribe to see how this dangerous confrontation changes everything." Razor held my beer bottle like it was evidence in a trial, turning it slowly in his massive hands, while his cold eyes never left my face. Around us, the clubhouse had gone quiet except for the distant rumble of motorcycles outside and the low hum of the jukebox playing an old Lynyrd Skynyrd song. "You know what I think, Jimmy?" Razor's voice carried across the silent room like a judge pronouncing sentence. "I think you're a goddamn rat. I think you came in here with some agenda, pretending to be our friend while you're really gathering information to sell to the highest bidder." Other club members had started moving closer, forming a loose circle around us. These weren't all bad men. Many of them were just working guys who'd found family and identity in the Brotherhood. But they were loyal to each other above everything else, and if Razor had decided I was a threat, they'd follow his lead without question. "That's not true," I said, but my voice cracked slightly on the words. "I'm just a writer, trying to tell your story." Razor laughed again, that sound like breaking glass that made everyone in the room tense up. "Your story? Whose story you really trying to tell, Jimmy? What newspaper you really writing for? What cop shop sent you in here to spy on us?" The accusations hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette. I could feel the mood in the room shifting from curiosity to hostility, the way a crowd can turn dangerous when someone lights the right fuse. "See, boys," Razor announced to the room, "we got ourselves a genuine infiltrator here. A man who's been sitting at our bar, drinking our beer, pretending to be our friend, while he's really building some kind of case against us." "That's not what I'm doing," I protested, but the circle of leather jackets was tightening around me. "Then what are you doing, Jimmy?" Razor stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. "Why all the questions about Danny Sullivan? Why you so interested in what happened 2 years ago on Highway 95? The mention of my brother's name hit me like a physical blow. Danny Sullivan, not the generic questions I'd been asking about accidents and former members, but my brother's actual name. They knew, they'd known all along who I was and why I was here. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but the lie felt pathetic even as it left my mouth. Razor reached out and grabbed my beer bottle from my hands, holding it up like a trophy. "This here's what we do to rats and liars in the Iron Brotherhood." He hurled the bottle across the room with tremendous force. It shattered against the far wall in an explosion of brown glass and foam, the sound echoing through the silent clubhouse like a gunshot. Beer dripped down the wall and pooled on the concrete floor while 50 pairs of eyes watched to see what would happen next. "Get out," Razor snarled. "Get out of our clubhouse, get out of our lives, and if I ever see you sniffing around our business again, you'll wish you'd minded your own goddamn business from the start." The humiliation was complete. I stood there in the center of that circle, surrounded by men who'd been laughing and drinking with me for months, now looking at me like I was something they'd scrape off their boots. My cover was blown, my investigation was over, and I was no closer to learning the truth about Danny's death than I'd been 6 months ago, but something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the months of grief and frustration. Maybe it was the injustice of Danny's death going unexplained and unavenged. Maybe it was just the realization that I had nothing left to lose. I stood up from the bar stool, my legs shaking, but my voice finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "You're right," I said, loud enough for everyone in the clubhouse to hear. "I'm not a writer, I lied about that. But I'm not a cop either, and I'm not here to hurt any of you." Razor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Then who the hell are you, and what do you want?" This was it. The moment when I either walked away defeated or finally told the truth I'd been carrying for 2 years. I looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the months, men who'd shared their stories, their drinks, their brotherhood with someone they thought they could trust. "My name is Dr. James Sullivan," I said, my voice growing, stronger with each word. "And for the past 15 years, I've been the trauma surgeon who's saved more of your lives than you'll ever know. What happens next will change everything. The best part of this story is about to unfold. Make sure you're subscribed, because the truth I'm about to reveal will shock everyone in that room. And maybe you too." The silence that followed my words was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the concrete floor. 50 hardened bikers, men who'd seen violence and lived through more than most people could imagine, stared at me, with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Razor was the first to break the silence, his voice dripping with contempt. "Trauma surgeon? You expect us to believe that some soft-handed doctor came in here pretending to be one of us? That's the biggest load of bullshit I've heard in my entire life." But something had changed in my posture, in the way I held myself. The months of pretending to be someone else fell away, and for the first time in 2 years, I was completely, authentically myself. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday night in November, I said, looking directly at Razor, "You were brought into Vegas General with a severed femoral artery after your bike went down on I-15. You'd lost so much blood that your heart stopped twice in the ambulance." Razor's expression shifted from mockery to something that might have been uncertainty. "You were unconscious when they wheeled you into Trauma Bay 2. Your blood pressure was 60/40, your pulse was 120, and you were maybe 10 minutes from bleeding out completely." I stepped closer, my medical training giving me confidence I'd never felt as Jimmy, the writer. "I worked on you for 4 hours. 4 hours of surgery to repair the artery, stabilize your blood pressure, and put you back together." The big man's hand unconsciously went to his thigh, where I knew a surgical scar ran from his knee to his hip. "When you woke up 3 days later, you tried to fight the nurses, called them bitches, and threatened to sue the hospital for saving your life without your permission." I smiled grimly at the memory. "You had no insurance, no way to pay for the surgery, but we saved you anyway, because that's what we do." Around the room, other faces were showing recognition now. Men who'd never connected their drunken, injured selves with the doctor who'd put them back together were starting to understand who was standing in front of them. "Tommy Rodriguez," I said, pointing to a heavy-set man with a grey beard who was sitting by the pool table. 2 years ago, overdose from fentanyl-laced cocaine. You were clinically dead for 6 minutes before we got your heart started again. Spent 2 weeks in intensive care while I monitored your brain function every single day." Tommy's face had gone pale. "Doc Sullivan." His voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus Washington," I continued, identifying a tall black man near the bar. "Knife fight outside a strip club in Henderson. The blade nicked your liver and you were bleeding internally. Emergency surgery at 2 in the morning. And I stayed with you through the entire recovery because you didn't have any family to call." Marcus stood up slowly, his eyes wide with recognition and something that might have been shame. "Jerry Hoffman, Paul Martinez, David Kim, Anthony Russo." I pointed to each man in turn, reciting their injuries, their surgeries, their recovery times, like I was reading from a medical chart. "I've operated on 12 members of this club over the past 15 years. 12 times I've held your lives in my hands and fought to keep you breathing." The transformation in the room was electric. Men who'd been ready to throw me out or, worse, were now staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to gratitude to something approaching awe. "You never knew my name," I continued, my voice steady now, strengthened by years of medical authority. "You never saw my face clearly because you were usually unconscious or high or drunk when they brought you in. But I knew yours. I remembered. Every one of you, because that's what doctors do. We remember the lives we save." Razor was still standing directly in front of me, but his aggressive posture had changed. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why are you here? Why the lies about being a writer?" This was the moment I'd been building toward for 6 months. The truth I'd come here to uncover, delivered to the men who might finally be able to give me answers. "Because my brother Danny Sullivan died 2 years ago in a motorcycle accident on Highway 95, I said, and my voice broke slightly on his name. "And I don't believe it was an accident." The room erupted in whispers and muttered conversations as club members processed what they'd just heard. But it was the reaction of one man that caught my attention. Steele Martinez, the club president, had gone rigid in his chair by the fireplace. His weathered face had turned the color of old concrete, and his hands were gripping his beer bottle so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Danny Sullivan," Steele repeated slowly. 25 years old, police academy candidate, riding a blue Yamaha R6. My heart started pounding. "You knew him." Steele stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. At 62 years old, he was the undisputed leader of the Iron Brotherhood, a man whose word was law among these riders. When he spoke, everyone listened. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I knew Danny. Good kid, too good for his own damn good." He walked across the room toward me, and 50 pairs of eyes followed his movement. This was the moment of truth, when I'd finally learn what had happened to my brother on that desert highway 2 years ago. "Dr. Sullivan," Steele said when he reached me, "your brother died because of us. But not the way you think." The words hit me like a physical blow, but Steele wasn't finished. Danny was trying to help one of our members, a prospect named Rick Castellano who'd been drinking and was about to ride home on his bike. "Your brother saw what was happening and tried to stop him, tried to talk him out of getting on that motorcycle drunk." Steele's voice was heavy with guilt and regret. "Rick got angry, shoved Danny, took off anyway. Danny followed him, trying to get him to pull over, to keep him from killing himself or someone else." The room was absolutely silent now, everyone hanging on Steele's words. What Rick's bike hit that guardrail doing 90. Danny swerved to avoid. The wreckage, lost control of his own bike, died trying to save the life of a drunk asshole who walked away from his crash without a scratch. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "Where's Rick now?" "Gone," Steele said simply. "We kicked him out of the club the day after the accident. Told him if we ever saw him again, he'd answer for what happened to your brother. Last I heard, he was living in Oregon somewhere, still drinking himself to death." The truth was nothing like what I'd expected. Danny hadn't been murdered by the Iron Brotherhood. He died because he was exactly the man I'd always known him to be, someone who couldn't walk away when another person was in danger, even if that person was a stranger. But Steele wasn't finished. "We paid for Danny's funeral," he said quietly, anonymously, through a lawyer. "We couldn't bring him back, couldn't undo what our member had caused, but we could make sure he was buried with honor. The expensive funeral that had mysteriously been paid for by an anonymous benefactor, it had been the Iron Brotherhood all along. We've been carrying that guilt for 2 years," Steele continued. "Good men died because one of ours made a stupid, selfish decision. We should have stopped Rick ourselves, should have taken his keys, should have been better brothers to him." Razor stepped forward, and for the first time since I'd met him, his voice was gentle. "Doc, I owe you my life. We all do. And your brother died, trying to do what you do every day in that hospital. Save people who probably don't deserve saving." What I had discovered in that clubhouse wasn't the conspiracy I'd expected. It was something more complex and more human. A group of men who'd been carrying their own guilt and grief, who'd tried to honor my brother's memory in the only way they knew how. One by one, the members of the Iron Brotherhood stood up. Not in threat or intimidation, but in respect. Respect for the doctor who'd saved their lives, respect for the brother who'd died trying to save another, and respect for the truth that had finally been spoken in that desert clubhouse.